In this video, I'm going to be counting down the top 5 worst rides at Universal Studios Florida that can just flat out ruin your day. But before we get started, I do just want to say that I love Universal Studios Florida. I love its epic theming and it has got some of the world's best attractions. But there are just some rides that are best avoided if you want to make the most of that precious theme park time. Now that's not to say that all the rides on this list are going to be flat out avoid at all costs. So try not to get too mad if your favourites on there, these are just my opinions after all. So number 5 on our list is going to be Kang and Kodo's Twirl and Hurl. Located in the Springfield area of Universal Studios, it has a loosely Simpsons based storyline that the riders have been tricked onto the ride and the only way that they can escape is by helping the aliens attack Springfield. But other than that, this is just a pretty generic roundy round ride that can be found at lots of other theme parks or even at kind of your local carnival or travelling carnival that comes to town. It just, you know, it's not a bad ride as such. There's just not a lot kind of unique or particularly exciting going on there. With that being said, as I alluded to earlier, this is a ride that's good for those smaller riders, so if you've got smaller children with you, it may still be worth checking out. Plus, you get some pretty good views of the park from way up there on the spaceships while they're spinning round, so it's not all bad. Number 4 on my list is going to be Woody Woodpecker's Nut House Coaster. Now, did you know this was actually the first roller coaster that was ever built at Universal Orlando Resort? In fact, did you even know that this ride existed? And right there, those are the two kind of things I've got an issue with for this ride. Number 1, it's old and it feels it. It's pretty rough on there. You do get shaken about quite a bit. The IP of Woody Woodpecker, I'm not sure how relevant that is today. For example, my kids just literally have no idea who that is. Number 2, I just think there are rides at Universal Orlando Resort that are very similar but much better executed. I'm thinking like Flight of the Hippogriff over at Islands of Adventure, very similar kind of kiddie coaster, but much smoother and much better themed, probably by virtue of the fact that it's like, I think it was built like 11 years after Woody Woodpecker's Nut House Coaster, but you can definitely feel that if you ride both rides. Now obviously the lower ride height requirements will still be appealing to some people who've got the smaller children with them. I myself have ridden this ride with my younger children quite a few times. And it's not that it's a bad ride, as I said, it's just that if there are other things that you want to do, your time might be better spent elsewhere. And then maybe if you've done everything else, you might want to come back to this one. But it's just there's kind of a very narrow appeal for this ride, and I think that's kind of a problem, and that's why it's on the list. Number 3 on this list, and this was a tough one for me, it's going to be Despicable Me, Minion, Mayhem. Now, I am a fan of the Despicable Me franchise. In fact, we actually have stayed at the Despicable Me or the Minions themed room at Portofino Bay Hotel. Fantastic, I love it. And I was a huge fan of this ride actually when it used to be a 3D attraction. But back in 2019, they took away the 3D element and turned it all to 2D, and that's just killed this ride for me. It's nowhere near as immersive as it used to be. I mean, I still enjoy the theming of the ride and the fart jokes, but now I just think the posted wait times just don't marry up with the overall experience of the ride. Again though, I can see its appeal to some people because it does have that lower ride height requirement, and also there is the option of stationary seating, which has no ride height requirement at all. Also, I guess if you never got to ride the 3D version of this, you might think the 2D version's great. It's just that I'm measuring it against something that no longer exists, but for me, this was a much better attraction when it was a 3D attraction. But judging by the high wait times that this consistently posts, I might be wrong. People still seem to love it. Alright, so number 2 is gonna be the Race Through New York with Jimmy Fallon. Now, I do want to say that this is not a bad ride as such, but it's got a couple of minor issues. Firstly, it does have a tendency to make folks motion sick, so expect ride delays because they're leaning. Number 2, you kind of have to know who Jimmy Fallon is, or pretty much none of it's going to make any sense. And number 3 is I think this ride peaks too early. And what I mean by that is it has got probably one of the best queue experiences anywhere. You get to go into the 30 Rock building, there's tons of memorabilia from The Tonight Show for you to check out, then you go upstairs and there's seating, and it's all air conditioned, and you can play video games, and sometimes you get to high five hashtag the panda. And when they're performing, they have the barbershop group, the Ragtime Gals, who are absolutely brilliant. Not to mention the fact that you get to hear the Roots rap the safety instructions. So that's kind of a problem with this ride. It's not that the ride is bad, it's that the queue's so good. When you get on the ride, you just kind of think like, oh, that was okay. Because the rest of it's so brilliant. The queue line and everything is fantastic. The entertainment's great. And I just think it feels like a little bit of a letdown at the end, which probably isn't fair because it's still kind of a fun ride, but it just feels that way a little bit. So that's why it's made it onto this list. And number one on this list will probably come as no surprise, but it's Fast and the Furious Supercharged. This may be the only ride on this list that has 0 redeeming features. Okay, well maybe the queue line's not too bad, the cars are kind of interesting, but it's not all air conditioned, so even that can be a little bit uncomfortable. And I will say that the live actors who actually work in the pre-show and stuff are actually great, but the ride itself is hot garbage. Like seriously, this ride just screams, quick, we need to make a Fast and the Furious ride, but we've never actually watched any of their films, but I've heard The Rock's popular, so we'll put him in there. Also family and girls in bikinis and helicopters go boom. There's just like, it doesn't make any sense. The story doesn't make any sense. The acting is terrible from the actors on screen, not the live actors. I mean, you would normally say at this point, well, the good thing is there's no height requirements, so little people can ride this, but I mean, putting your kids through this could be considered cruelty to children. Seriously, it's just awful. I once waited 40 minutes to ride this, which was my first and only ride on this ride, and I'm still salty about it now. Like, I feel like Universal should like issue like a written apology to everybody who's ever stood in line for it for just wasting the time. It's the Fast and the Furious franchise, which is an entire movie series built around illegal street racing, and they didn't make this a ride about car racing. It writes itself. Now, I have heard people talking about turning this into a night bus attraction, which I think could make a lot of sense for Universal to try and redeem themselves. If they could keep the existing show building, they could Harry Potter it up, change the movie, you could use the existing ride vehicles and everything, and that could still actually then be an enjoyable ride themed to Harry Potter. But as the Fast and the Furious ride, it's just awful. So now you know what rides not to do at Universal Studios. You should probably clue yourself on some other pitfalls to avoid. Well, we've got you covered in this video right here. You can check that out next.